Welcome to Inside Voices, a well-read magazine between the pages podcast. I'm Robert Gwaltney, joined by my friend and co-host Jeffrey Dale Lofton, and we're both so excited to have another Jeffrey with us this evening, Jeffrey Blount. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. It's good to be with you guys.
Well, we're so happy to have you. Jeffrey, before we get started, I want to share a little bit about you with our listeners. So, Jeffrey Blount is the award-winning author of four novels: Almost Snow White, winner of the 2013 USA Best Book Awards; Hating Heidi Foster, winner of the 2013 Reader's Favorite Book Award for Young Adult Literature; The Emancipation of Evan Walls, winner of the 2020 National Indie Excellence Award for African American Fiction and other awards. Jeffrey's latest novel is Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, winner of the 2024 Next Generation Indie Book Awards for African American Fiction. He is also an Emmy Award winning television director, a 2016 inductee to the Virginia Communications Hall of Fame. During a 34-year career at NBC News, Jeffrey directed a decade of Meet the Press, The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and major special events. He was also a contributor for HuffPost and has been published in the Washington Post and other publications, commenting on issues of race, social justice, and writing. Jeffrey Dale.
Thank you, Robert. Jeffrey, it's so good to be talking with you. We're so glad you're with us this evening.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Likewise.
Thank you. So, to start us off, without giving anything away, will you set up the story of Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way?
Yes, Mr. Jimmy is James Henry Ferguson, and he is an African American billionaire, very successful, very famous, and actually, and strangely enough, as a billionaire, he's actually beloved, and he's beloved because of his philanthropic nature. He's large in his community and helpful in his community, and people have responded to that. He suffers, unfortunately, a very public and very shocking fall from grace. Having grown up in rural United States, he decides to run away from the big city, from Washington, D.C., to very, very rural Mississippi, because he thinks that if he gets far enough away, he can escape social media and traditional media and try to find some way back to redemption because he's broken his life, he's broken his family, and he has a lot of work to do, and he thinks he can figure it out there. Um, he doesn't know when he buys this house, sight unseen, that he is about a football field away from a community mired in abject poverty, the kind of poverty we don't really understand exists in our nation, but it really does. And he doesn't want to get drawn into it because he's got his own problems, but he does get drawn into this community. And while he's spending time trying to find his redemption, he realizes that he has to spend time helping this community find itself, or he might watch it collapse alongside himself.
Mm.
So
Thank
your story, a story of redemption and salvation. What's the inspiration for the book?
Well, the inspiration is sort of threefold. Having been in the news business and you cover a lot of stories, and sometimes they just stick with you. So over the years, a few things stuck with me, and I created this community called the town of Ham, Mississippi, and this community called Around the Way. And these folks in it are living in abject poverty. And it allowed me the opportunity to speak to some of those issues that I carried with me, like a lack of healthcare, lack of education, lack of housing, lack of support and services from your government. And so this is something that had been carrying on for a long time that I knew somehow I wanted to touch. And then my wife, who was a correspondent for CNN, was down in Louisiana doing a story. She and her crew got lost, and they found themselves in a really disturbing situation, a community like the one I would write about. And she called me and she was very upset about what she's seen. And she said, Jeffrey, I can't believe that we are really allowing our fellow Americans to live like this. She was heartbroken, and that really stuck with me. So then we had the two parts: my history of what I wanted to do, my wife having seen it, which then sent me to researching, And then the redemption part is another thing I'd always had, because we do a lot of stories about people over time who had fallen from grace or done some scandal, and you wonder, can they ever make it back? And so my daughter and I were going to see Brian Stevenson speak one Sunday at a church, and he uttered these words, which I have in the epigraph of Mr. Jimmy. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done.
Mm.
And that brought the whole project together. And so that was really this three-part inspiration. I had two pieces, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting until I heard that speech, and then I knew I could bring the whole story to fruition.
Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way, I love that title. How did that find its way to the cover of your book?
Well, around the way is sort of, at least in the Southern African American, communities, is just another way of saying the neighborhood. You know, I sent actually a rap video to my agent, just to show her how much of a culture it was. I think the whole video was a shock for her. But in it, the guy says it's just another day around the way. And and if you forgot a neighborhood or a street, I remember the older folks would say, Miss Robinson, over, around the way, over by such and such. And so it just became another phrase for neighborhood. And when I created this, I didn't really have a name for it. I made up the name for the city, and I wanted something that was culturally relevant. And so that phrase came to me. And frankly, I thought the publisher wouldn't keep it, but at every step, everybody liked it. And so I think it has a rhythm to it when you speak it. And so it stayed, and I'm very happy that it did.
I am too. So if you can't tell, I'm from the South. But
Oh, no.
before I even knew you, Jeffrey, before I had an opportunity to connect you on social media, when I saw that book cover and I saw that title, I connected with it right away. So I'm so glad that they let you keep that amazing title.
Yeah, thank you. Me too. Yeah. And being from the South, that you can be James, but people will call you Mr. Jimmy, or and
Absolutely.
when I go to my hometown, I used to be Jeffrey, but now that I have gray hair, I'm Mr. Jeffrey. So
Mr. Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, I've heard you talk in other interviews about the activism of kindness. You've mentioned it, I think, as one of your guiding tenets. Will you expound on that and tell us about this notion of the activism of kindness?
Yes, and thank you for asking that, because I think, in particular today, the activism of kindness is something that we really need. And I think of myself as a literary activist, that I write books with missions, and part of my mission in Mr. Jimmy was to talk about those issues, but to show how he dealt with them in this new community, and he came at it through kindness. So, and we all do little bits of the activism of kindness every day when we do small things to help people. And so I think of the activism of kindness, it means that you acknowledge the pain around you. And with kindness as your guide and your rule, you step into that pain of your neighbor, and you do whatever you can to help your neighbors, to alleviate that pain, to make your neighbor's life better. My father always used to say to us that we are in this life for somebody other than ourselves, for something other than ourselves. And for me, that whole idea of being kind to your neighbor, of stepping in, using your heart and your soul, whatever it is you have that can help someone, when you do that, and you do that with the purpose of changing lives, then that is the activism of kindness. And it's what Mr. Jimmy does in the book, and it's what I intended the book to do.
Mm, thank you.
Jeffrey, you are without a doubt very purposeful in your writing. You explore the cycles of poverty within communities, education disparity. I mean, ultimately, what do you want your readers to take away from this story?
So there is a phrase that I have stolen for my purposes, a part of the UN mission statement, which is every human being is born free and equal in dignity and rights. And Mr. Jimmy's life in Ham, Mississippi, in the neighborhood of Around the Way, is to emphasize that. he recognizes that, and he feels for all of these folks who he sees their humanity first and foremost, and recognizes that this is unfair. And I have something that I can do to change this. I have an ability to change this. So I hope that the reader, when they finish Mr. Jimmy from Around the Way and they close the cover, that they are inspired to sit for a moment and reflect on what they can do to make that statement that we're all born free and equal in dignity and rights a reality. And I'm not talking about changing the whole world. I'm talking about changing the world of the little kid down the street that you can become a mentor, or changing the world of the elderly person who lives alone down the street, who you can change that life for. And so we tend to think of the kindnesses, or the thing when someone and tries to inspire us to do more, and it's happened to me, you get overwhelmed. You think, oh my God, the world is a big mess. How can I make a difference? A penny after penny after penny makes a dollar. So you go out and you do what you can do for the folks that you can help. And that is the activism of kindness. And when you read this book, you take in all of the things that Mr. Jimmy has, his education, his intellect, his finances, his heart, and his soul. And he puts all of that into Ham, Mississippi. So even if you sit and you talk to someone, an unhoused person on the street, and you have a conversation, you put everything you have in that moment to make that person feel that you see them as a human being. That in and itself is the activism of kindness.
Mm. You know, you mentioned earlier that Jimmy is a very, very wealthy man. He's a well-known figure, and he's well liked. Uh, so the media is really well aware of him. And you've spent your career in the media as a renowned director. How did your career shape the portrayal of the news media in your story?
Well, a lot of probably many of my former colleagues wouldn't be happy in the way I portrayed it, but I believe that it's our reality today. Um, when I went to college, when I was getting my degree in broadcast journalism and mass communication, there was such an emphasis on the facts, the facts, the facts. In fact, if you were a reporter and you were doing a stand up at the end of your piece, you better not say what you think or what you feel, because people don't need to know that. They need to know the facts so they can figure out what they feel and that sort of thing. But over time, I began to realize that part of the scandals that are happening, part of the sensationalism, and it occurred the moment when news organizations were required to have good ratings and make a profit, which they weren't always, that didn't always used to be the case. And once that became the case, people began to be sensational. And people began to make more of things than they were, or to concentrate on scandalous things rather than the boring news items that actually affected the lives of people. And I wanted to show that. So if Mr. Jimmy was looking for redemption from the media, I wanted to show the media that we're dealing with today and how he would have to fight it. And so you see in that book, the sensationalism that is possible, and why you can't escape these things, and the lack of heart, and the lack of I don't want to say a kindness, because it's not the job of a reporter to be kind, but the lack of straightforward coverage for just the facts. Now, I do put one character in there who is a woman who is a writer from the big paper in Washington, D.C. And she is my example of what journalism should be. So there are two things happening here. There's the way that the paper is portraying it, way that two papers are portraying it, the way that the TV show, there's kind of a a Hollywood kind of TV show where one of the characters appears on to dish some dirt on Mr. Jimmy, all that kind of stuff. But then it's mirrored by this woman from the big paper in Washington, D.C., who is what I remember journalism to be. So I'm glad that you're asking me that question, because there was a point that I was making in doing that, and a reminder. Okay, this is where we're sliding down. This woman should remind you of where you should go back to.
Mm. Mm.
Jeffrey, you've spoken about the idea of air pressure, water pressure, blood pressure. Would you mind digging into that a little bit more for us and why it's important?
It's important. Well, first of all, it comes from my oldest and best friend. His name is Perry Bell. We've been friends for almost 60 years. And it was one of those things, and when we talked about anytime the struggle in life, and he was going through a situation that his wife was very ill at the time, and we did lose her a couple of years ago. But as they were struggling and going through the beginning of this illness, we'd have these conversations, and I would be trying to offer my love and comfort as a friend. And then one day he just said, I just get up and check my air pressure, blood pressure, water pressure. And the first thing I did was laugh. I said, that is fantastic. And so we started using that as, if I was upset or if he was upset, we'd have these conversations. And this was the phrase that brought us back to our reality and our senses, and that how blessed we were to have the things that we had. And when his wife finally passed, that was in the original conversation about when she left. We talked about him being able to check those three things, and I would be there for him. But every day, if he got up, to remember he had his air pressure, water pressure, blood pressure, that he could make it.
I love that.
Yeah. Jeffrey, you've mentioned so much. You've written 4 books, I think, correct?
4 books, yes.
Who are your literary heroes? I don't think you've mentioned influences yet. Could you tell us who really influences your work?
Yes. So I grew up loving Baldwin. I fell into John Irving. My wife introduced me to John Irving, and he became a monster influence. Um, when I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison,
Mm,
I was hooked. And I wanted to read everything she wrote just because I wanted to learn how to make people feel the way she made me feel. Robert Frost says, if there's no tears in the author, there are no tears in the reader.
Mm.
And I often used to sit and think, certain parts in her books, she must have been going through hell when she wrote this, because I'm going through hell as a reader reading it. So they taught me a lot about how to, um, I developed my tone, my rhythm, um, my thought process, some humor from John Irving, who could on one page have you crying and on the next page have you rolling on the floor laughing. How do you do that? And so those are the people that inspired me. They really taught me the power of writing, and they taught me how to go about it. One of the things I do with Mr. Jimmy in this novel is kind of John Irving-esque. The first thing that happens is he meets this woman at the post office, and towards the end of the book, and at the very he envisions, just as the book is ending, he's envisioning what he would do now if he bumped into that woman. And John Irving used to do this thing where he'd have this one sentence that stood out at the very beginning of the book. Some in first chapter, second chapter, you just stop and you go, it made such an impression on you. And then at the end of the book, he'd use almost exactly the same sentence, and you realize, oh
mm.
wow, look what he just did. Look at the journey he just took me on and brought all these emotions back in that one sentence. So those are the kinds of things, the techniques and things that I picked up from them. But I like to think that the best thing I picked up from them was how to put heart in a novel.
Mm, agreed. Yeah, there's a Toni Morrison documentary that I own. I've got it on my personal stash on Fandango, and it's a comfort for me. I mean, I watch the thing over and over.
Yeah,
So I'm a
yeah.
huge fan of all of those authors as well that you just referenced. Jeffrey, early on, you talked a little bit about what you'd hoped that the reader would come away with when you wrote Mr. Jimmy.
Yes.
Um, I've always had this theory that that a writer is one person at the beginning of the book and another person at the end of that journey. So you knew thematically with great intention the story that you were going to set out to tell. But how did Mr. Jimmy change you?
Well, Mr. Jimmy changed me because he reinforced, and I love it that you asked that question and you ask it that way, because you do start a book thinking you know where you want it to go and everything, and then little things happen that change. And so what happened when I finished? So one of the things I finished the book in Maine, closed the laptop, and I went for a run. And I'm thinking about Mr. Jimmy and thinking about the journey that was Mr. Jimmy. Um, and I thought about, where I was at the beginning of the story, the mission that I had, and had I accomplished the mission, and then how all the different ways that Mr. Jimmy made me go in the book to to get to the end of that mission, ways that I didn't expect. And what did those different ways do to me? Well, all of us have room in our heart for growth, for more love and more people. So I created, there's a relationship between Mr. Jimmy and one little boy named Juba. And in that relationship, I taught myself how to see children differently than I did. I taught myself how to see a child who some people might, if they see him destroying something, but maybe when I approach that child, I should see that he's actually trying to take something apart to see how it works and he'll put it back together. The perception, my perception of how I saw a child in need or in struggle, I think changed because of Mr. Jimmy. And by the time I was on this run and thinking about all these things, Mr. Jimmy spoke to me and said, "You haven't ended this right." You haven't, the message that you want has to end exactly this way, so that your growth is seen, and also that the reader's gone through some growth and they come away with what you need. So I finished that run. I ran right back to the room where I was writing. I sat down, opened the laptop, rewrote the ending, which is the ending that's in the book now.
Mm, I love that. So I'm a terrible snoop, and I can't help but see what might be a guitar behind you.
Yes.
Do you play?
I played a little bit, enough that when my kids were little, we would gather on one of their beds, and at nighttime I'd play some folk tunes and we would all sing. My son is the professional musician now, and so if he's around, I don't even pull it out because it's just too embarrassing.
Well, is music part of your creative process?
Oh yes. In fact, so when I wrote The Emancipation of Evan Walls, which was my first, I call it my first big novel because the other two are novellas. I was still working at NBC, and I needed something to inspire me, and quickly. Music has always been an inspiration to me, and so uh, I I I needed something that felt like the book. And so what happens is I would like pick a soundtrack or a piece of classical music or something that represents my mindset about this book. And so I will listen to that, and within minutes, I'm back in where I need to be in my headspace. So I learned to use music to motivate me quickly to be where I need to be so I could write quickly in those days because I only had a few hours in a day because of work. So music is an inspiration in that way. And Yeah, and music can also take me places where literature can take me. So some of my favorite music, I just love to sit and listen. Some takes me back to when I was young, and some takes me forward to what I hope for.
Great. It is a time machine, isn't it?
It
Backwards
is a
and
time
forward.
machine. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Goodness. So, Jeffrey, we are close to the end of our time together, but
Mhm.
I would love for you to share with us what's next for you.
Say that again. I missed you.
Sure, I would love for you to share with us what's next.
Well, I am attempting to do my first historical fiction or biographical fiction,
Mm.
and it remains to be seen how that works out. But the story quickly is about two slaves, brothers. One brother will be the focal point of the book, but so they were both born on a Georgia plantation. One becomes the main character becomes the first African American captain of a U.S. military vessel, which was a revenue cutters, which will become the Coast Guard. There is only one icebreaker, and then he was in the Northwest. So there's only one icebreaker remaining in the Coast Guard. It is the largest, most sophisticated, technologically wise ship in the fleet. It's named the Healy after a slave. His brother becomes president of Georgetown University. And there is a big old Gothic building that sits in the middle of campus. If you're coming across the Key Bridge into the city, you can look to your left and you can see the top of it. It's named Healy Hall after a slave. It's a phenomenal story. And you know, I'm a little more in the head and in the heart, and this is a little bit of swashbuckling stuff because of all the things he's doing on the seas. But I think it's an important story to tell for many reasons. And so I'm working hard to try and to give it the heart that I usually try to put in books, but also tell the dynamic story of his life at sea.
How did you
Well,
discover the story? How did you discover that story?
My wife, as I told you, was a correspondent for CNN and anchor, and she interviewed a guy who was at that time, I think he was the head of the Northeast region, Captain James McPherson for the Coast Guard. And she got to know him, and then I had written a film that was in a museum, a script for a film that was in a museum here in DC, and they had seen that film. And unbeknownst to them, you know, they didn't know I wrote it, but he and his wife were talking to Jean about this film, and she said, "Oh, Jeffrey wrote that." And he said, "Well, he's the kind of guy I need to write this story that the Coast Guard has, but nobody knows how to tell it." And so he brought the story to me. So that's the other part, is that I'm kind of writing this with him in the sense that I'm writing a lot of the regular emotions and the storyline and stuff, and then I'll get to this big scene on the ocean, and I say to Jim, "Okay, you write," and he writes it for me, and then I will redo it into the original tone of the book, because even he says he's not a writer, he doesn't want his words to be in there, but he gives me the outline basically for those things. So there's a lot of different things happening for me with this book.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
it is exciting. And we will have you back when that book makes its way out into the world.
Thank you. That would be great. I would appreciate that.
Jeffrey Blount, it has been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure for me. I enjoy the conversation with you guys. I have really enjoyed meeting you out on tour, and I hope that we get to see each other more often and have some dinner and continue to talk about books. In the meantime, thank you so much, and thank you to Well Read Magazine for having me.
Well, we're going to hold you to that.
Okay.
Gentle listeners, until next time, for Inside Voices, I'm Robert Gwaltney.
And I'm Jeffrey Dale Lofton. And remember, to be creative is to be courageous. Thanks for joining us.